Welcome back to this Real America's Voice news break. I'm Terrence Bates. A meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump has been agreed upon. That's the word this morning from the Kremlin. That meeting could take place as soon as next week, and the venue has reportedly been decided on in principle, but there's no word exactly where it's going to be. President Trump is trying to help broker and end the years-long war between Russia and Ukraine. The top-level meeting announcement comes just 24 hours after President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, met with top Russian leaders in Moscow Wednesday. That meeting included a 3-hour sit-down with Vladimir Putin. Taking to True Social, President Trump saying he has updated European Union allies on the progress that's being made and, quote, "Everyone agrees this war must come to a close, and we will work towards that in the days and weeks to come." Meantime, dozens of U.S. trade partners are digging deeper into their coffers as steeper tariffs are officially in effect. Import taxes are not at the levels that they've been seen in almost 100 years. Americans are reportedly expected to pay an average of 18% more for imported products, as the U.S. similarly is collecting billions in additional revenue thanks to the Trump tariffs. The White House is also confident that businesses will ramp up new investments and begin hiring more workers in order to rebalance the U.S. economy and re-energize the United States as a manufacturing power. More than 60 countries and the European Union face tariff rates of 10% or higher. Countries like Taiwan, Vietnam, and Bangladesh are paying 20% tariffs, while the president just slapped India with a combined 50% tariff for buying Russian oil. Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee looking to take over her state's top job.
Trump is back, America is blessed, and Tennessee better than ever. I'm Marsha Blackburn. Here in the volunteer state, we always lead the way. And that's why I am announcing my candidacy for governor.
Senator Blackburn going on to say that President Trump is going to need strong conservative governors who can help support his job creation and energy production policies. That's a quick check of your headlines. I'm Terrence Bates.
Of the MAGA doctrine and president of Turning Point USA. Here's Charlie KIRK.
All right, I need to tell you guys about TikTok. Check out TikTok at TikTokeconomicimpact.com. Right now, over 7.5 million businesses in America are thriving on TikTok, businesses that employ more than 28 million people. But behind the stats, it's the stories that really matter, like Dan O. Seasoning from Kentucky, who used TikTok to reach new customers and grow from a one-man show to a team of 45. Or Arizona Taco King, who was able to employ more than 28 people and pay them well thanks to the traffic that TikTok brings in. Go to TikTokeconomicimpact.com. Their success means jobs, support for families, and stronger local economies. Go to TikTokeconomicimpact.com. That is TikTokeconomicimpact.com.
These were people who were sacrificing their children to Molech. They would heat up this molten hot god who would sear the baby on the arms of this molten hot god. In fact, Plutarch, who's not even a biblical writer, he was a Greek writer in the first century, says that the village drummers would beat their drums louder to drown out the cries of the kids so the parents couldn't hear their own kids being sacrificed. Charlie, on every college campus I go to, on every college campus you go to, there's going to be some kid who's going to say, why doesn't God stop all the evil in the world? Well, here's a situation where God does stop the evil by judging these people, and the atheists are complaining about it. Like, wait a minute. Do you want God to step in or not? Here he is stepping in. He is crushing these people because of the evil they've done, and people are upset about it. And
they would say yes, but not the kids and the woman, right?
Right. If it's a literal command that they did crush everybody, there's no evidence it's literal. It seems hyperbolic. But if it is literal, then the question is, does God have the right to take people into the next life whenever he wants?
Of course.
Yes. If Christianity is true, people don't die, they just change location. They go from this life to the next life, and it's up to God when that happens. And this, if it is true that everyone was killed, this is what happened. The more, I think, proper interpretation, when you look at all the data, is these were exaggerated commands to push people out of the land so the promised people could get into the promised land to bring forth the promised Messiah to save the whole world. Remember, God's working with free creatures. He's not going to overpower their free will. He's going to warn them for 400 years. If they don't repent, he's going to judge them so the promised people can get into the land and bring forth Jesus ultimately. That's going to bless the whole world. So there's a lot more on Copan's book on this. I have a little bit more on my book, Stealing from God, on the killing of the Canaanites, so-called killing of the Canaanites. But it's judgment. And Charlie, we don't like judgment in our country, right? We want God to be, as C.S. Lewis put it, a benevolent old man who just wanted to look down and see that everybody was having a good time.
Yeah, we want to be nicer than God.
Right, right. But God is the God of judge. He's infinitely just and he's infinitely loving.
Which is funny because the campus group is very big on justice. That's their big
I know.
thing. Yeah. But not really. They say they are. But
that's why I always ask them, look, there's two things you can have in the afterlife. You can have either justice or grace. Does anybody here want justice in the afterlife? I don't want justice. I want grace. If I get justice, Charlie, I'm toast. An infinitely just being is going to judge me. He's got. I haven't been infinitely just, so I deserve justice.
what do you have to say, and this is an AI-generated one, but I hear this all the time. This helps me kind of remember, about the Bible, and I think I know your answer to this, and I've read a couple books about this, but that the story of the Old Testament closely resembles Canaanite and Mesopotamian deities, that the Old Testament has like a lot of similarities, such as the story of Moses or the creation story or a flood story.
Oh, yeah, sure. Every ancient culture has a flood story.
Sure.
Now, what do you think the reason for that is?
Because there was a flood.
There's a flood, right? Everybody had some sort of story related to it. But if you look at the story of Moses, for example, you don't find parallels that are all that close. And if you do, it doesn't necessarily mean that Moses copied. What's unique about the Israelites is that they are told to be separate from their neighbors. That's one reason they're pushing out the Canaanites. Yeah. Holy, separate, right?
Same word.
The last thing they want to do is borrow from the people that they're trying to separate from. In fact, what happens to them is when they do get too intermingled with the Canaanites, God judges them and continues to say, you're playing the harlot. You're going with Baal. You're going with all these other deities, and you should be worshiping me. So he judges them.
And so, without getting into too much detail, though, is there any credence to this idea that the Bible was copied regionally between other River Valley civilization mythologies?
I have not necessarily heard that objection, but I can tell you from
Bill Maher said that on our show. Remember,
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, here's the problem. If you look at the archaeologies, let's just look at the archaeology.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Joshua and Jericho. The evidence from Jericho shows that, oddly, the walls fell down and out. There's no other city that has ever been discovered where the walls have fallen straight down and out. When you take over a city, you go inward, you crush the wall, you knock it down, and the walls go inward. Here, we find in the dirt there in Jericho that the walls fell out, just like the Bible says.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
And there are, when we just did a 22 one-hour lesson series on the top archaeological discoveries of the Bible, Charlie, we discovered over 107, I think it was 107 people in the Bible that have been found in the dirt. And about 75 of them were from the Old Testament. And many of the events of the Old Testament have corroborative data in the dirt. How would somebody writing the Old Testament, say 1,000 years after Joshua, 1406 BC, know that the walls fell down and out? How would he know that? He wouldn't. In fact, you know how many places are named in the book of Joshua? What is it, 24 chapters in the book of Joshua? There's over 350 named places in the book of Joshua. Just in the book of Joshua. It works out to something like 13 places a chapter. More than that even. I can't remember the exact number, but it's crazy how many place locations, and many of these place locations have been discovered. This is not an invented storyline that was put into writing 1,000 years later. Moses and editors later, there are editors that came after Moses, like they put his death in Deuteronomy. They wrote this down at the time.
So here's a question of morality. It's the problem of divine command theory. I've heard this question only once. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good?
Euthyphro dilemma from one of Plato's writings. Socrates says this, and it's supposed to put the believer in God in a dilemma. If you're going to say God is the source of morality, does he look up at a standard beyond him and say, oh, that's good, I'll do that? If so, why do you need God? We can do that, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's much of a dilemma, though. Maybe I'm I think the answer to both is yes.
You are correct. Here's why it's not a dilemma.
Yeah.
Why is it not a dilemma?
Because God himself his essence is good.
That's
right?
it.
Am I right?
Yeah, he's the standard. He doesn't have to look up.
Exactly.
He's not arbitrary. He is the standard.
He is the standard, yeah.
So it's easily answered, and yet atheists online still think this is a good one.
What am I missing about that, though?
You're not missing anything. Okay. It's a false dilemma. A true dilemma is A or non-A. A false dilemma is A or B. Maybe there's a C. Maybe there's a third option, and in this case, there is. God is the standard. His nature is the moral standard. The buck has to stop somewhere. It stops with God's nature.
So I asked AI, this is kind of goes to show how good of a teacher you are, like the best intellectually rigorous questions. And like I can answer most of these, honestly. And I don't do this professionally. I mean, I do somewhat of this, but you're like a super professional on this. And so
that's what my mom says.
I'll read this one. This is from AI. If God desires all people to be saved and know the truth, why does he remain hidden or silent to sincere seekers who never experience divine revelation or compelling reason to believe?
Everybody experiences divine revelation because God has written 2 books. Yes, he's written through men what we call the scriptures, the Bible, but he's also written the book of nature. In other words, we could say God has the book of his words and the book of his works. And everybody has the book of his works. Everybody knows there's a creator God who's moral because of the creation and the moral law written on the heart. And the way we know God is we know God by his effects. So if there's a creation, that's the effect. We reason back to a cause, a creator. If there's design in the universe, that's the effect. We reason back to a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law written on the heart, that's the effect. We reason back to a cause, a moral lawgiver. So there's nobody in the world who doesn't know that there's a creator God who's moral, and we haven't lived up to that standard. There are people who've never heard of the solution to our moral problem, that's Jesus, but everybody knows that there's a creator moral God, and the Bible indicates that if you take a step toward that, the works that he's provided, he will get you the word so you can be saved.
This is the other one. We spend a lot of time on this, but let me just repeat it, and I want you to answer it as you would a student. How can we trust Scripture as morally authoritative when it regulates slavery, commands genocidal warfare like 1 Samuel 15, and enforces harsh penalties for non-crimes by modern standards without undermining the concept of God's moral perfection?
I would ask the person, again, by what moral standard are you saying that?
You're appealing to a Christian standard.
Yeah, you are. Secondly, we've already dealt with those before on this program, that slavery was not the kind of slavery we had.
It was a kind of bankruptcy law.
Right, it was a kind of bankruptcy law.
The genocidal warfare.
It wasn't genocide, it was sinocide. Now, why do I say that? Because God wiped out the Israelites for doing the same kind of things. In other words, it wasn't ethnicity God was worried about. It was the ethics.
You mean like after the golden calf, after the...
Sure, he wipes them out, right? How many times does God judge Israel for the evil they've done?
Repeatedly.
A lot. Yeah. And our mutual friend Dennis Prager puts it this way. He said, one of the reasons I know the Old Testament...
The least flattering... telling of no, it's true. It's the least flattering telling of an ancient people.
Yeah, that's it. You know it. Yeah, they would never invent such an embarrassing history of themselves. They keep getting dope slapped by their own God. And Charlie, you don't see this. Like if you go to Egypt, all of the monuments in Egypt are propaganda monuments to how good the Pharaoh is. They don't include any negative behavior. But when you read the Old Testament, this is the history of the Jews. They get the gold medal in sin every time.
Here's one that I think is important. Again, this one is, I can answer this one.
Answer it. Go ahead, take it.
Given the discrepancies between gospel resurrection accounts and the lack of external corroboration, How do you defend the resurrection as a historical event without begging the question? Well, first of all, the discrepancies are a feature, not a bug. The fact that there are discrepancies means that it's probably true. Because if you were trying to lie, every single account would be exactly the same, right?
Exactly.
Like we know this whenever there's, car accident or something in the
or a
parking
murder
lot here.
Yeah.
Or even like, something happens here and there's a little controversy at the Turning Point campus or at an event. I bring 3 people in and I get a generalized telling, but I realize like, oh, okay, got it. What mile per hour do you think they were going? What was this? What was the color of the car? But, eventually you get towards that. So I think it's a feature, not a bug. And then if there are a lot of external corroboration. I mean, there's Josephus, right?
Yes.
There's other Roman historians. Also, the Talmud talks about Jesus, not the resurrection, but they said that people believed in the resurrection.
Exactly.
Before I go to break, I want to tell you guys about Z-Factor. Z-Factor is a great way that you guys can get the sleep that you need. It goes beyond melatonin. They use a combination of 4 natural ingredients to help you relax your mind so you fall asleep quicker. And once you fall asleep, you stay asleep. 100% drug-free, no groggy feeling when you wake up. Z-Factor was developed by Relief Factor, so you can count on the science behind it. Right now, pay only $19.95 on a 30-day supply of 46% savings. Call 1-800-4RELIEF. That's the number 1-800-4RELIEF, or visit relieffactor.com. Better sleep without drugs. See how Relief Factor can get you the Z's that you want.